intervention isn't always welcomed, wanted, or needed. My name's Sam, and this is my channel. Do. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Sam, and today we'll be talking about the 1969 novel Where the Lillies Bloom and the conversation it creates about social services. Written by Vera and Bill Cleaver, Where the Lillies Bloom is about a poor family sharecropping in Appalachia and the hardships they endure. Now, if you don't know exactly what sharecropping is, the basic idea is that there is an agreement formed between a landowner and a tenant where the tenant grows crops on the land and gives part of the yield to the landowner as payment. The act of sharecropping itself doesn't play much of a role in the novel, but it does have a heavier implication that I'll get to in a bit. So in the beginning of the book, we're introduced to the Luther family. We have the head of the family, Roy Luther, and his 3 children, Devola, Mary Call, and Romy. Roy Luther is very sick with pneumonia and on the edge of death. Before he dies, he asks Mary Call to do him 2 favors. One is to prevent anybody from finding out that he has died, claiming that doctors and undertakers only want money from them. And 2, not to let their sister Devola around their landlord Kaiser, who was interested in marrying her. The father dies soon after that, and Mary Call takes on the responsibility of breadwinner and caretaker. She's soon foraging for herbs and roots to sell to the local pharmacist so they can feed themselves. She's lying to anybody asking questions and bending over backwards so they don't starve. Mary Call knows whatever she's going through can't compare with the trauma of having her family split up by social services. But still, she's only a 14-year-old girl and she can only handle so much. The last straw breaks when Kaiser's sister confronts her about the deed to the property. Previously, Kaiser had signed over the property to Mary Call and Devola. However, the sister claimed that this contract was null and void and that they had to leave immediately. That risked the entire family. With nowhere to turn, Mary Call offers herself in marriage to Kaiser. And when he denies that, knowing that Devola is actually interested in marrying him, she offers to let Kaiser marry Devola. The marriage allows the family to legally keep the land since it would be Devola's property as well, and since Devola is married and Kaiser is an adult, Romy and Mary Call would not be in fear of being separated from social services. The book basically ends with Kaiser promising to treat them with respect and take care of them, and Mary Call rethinking her entire opinion of him. Now, this book doesn't have a specific time frame, but with context clues, we can assume that it takes place somewhere between the 30s and the 60s. Probably somewhere on the tail end of that, as neither the Depression or the Dust Bowl were mentioned. It's 2021, and I find the parallels between Mary Call's situation and the situation that so many kids in foster care are going through startling. Decades later, and I can still identify with Mary Call's fight with the state. This novel is meant to point out the cold, cruel realities of isolation, but also highlights a system of social service injustice that we're still facing today. Let's go back to the idea of sharecropping and the effects it had on Roy Luther. As a practice, it seems like a reasonable way for people just starting out to be able to afford a farm, right? You get a farm, and at the end of the season, you give a portion of the crop to the landowner as payment and sell the rest for a profit. However, it was never that cut and dry. Much like today, the landowner usually tacked on high property taxes, fees, and hidden interests that would actually leave many farmers in debt. And while the book never explicitly stated that Roy Luther was going through this, Devola was always okay with marrying Kaiser. So why was Roy Luther so against it? I can only assume that Kaiser was using it as a carrot above Roy Luther's head. Let me marry your daughter, and what's mine is ours. And Roy Luther was much too proud a man to sell his daughter for his own debts. In the end, he'd rather die a poor man. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people have conversations with family members about how they feel like they're going to be a financial burden when they die. It sends chills up my spine that we are still forced to have this conversation about being unable to afford death. But let's take a deeper look at Mary Call's behavior as well. At 14 years old, she was ready to take on the entire responsibility of the family, because otherwise she knew they would be separated. Not only was she worried about issues with Rami, but what about her own mental health? Today, we might have slightly better systems in place, but far too many families slip through these cracks, and there are way too many people in social service jobs that just shouldn't be. When the possibility of having your children taken away because of job loss or housing instability even exists, then the system is failing. Kids are keeping secrets, just like Mary Call, 20 plus years later because it's easier to punish the family than it is to help them. I think this book is a great jumping off point for the conversation about the reform of these programs and how intervention isn't always welcomed, wanted, or needed. Instead of shaming families and ripping them apart for things they can't control, we should be more focused on providing education and opportunities that prevents the need for intervention in the first place. If you have any thoughts about changing the ways our social programs work, leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your ideas. Otherwise, that's all I have for you today. Check out my social medias down below, and I'll see you next week for more shenanigans.